And if you want to look at systems that are about existential risk, then there's a fairly large community that cares about that. A good number, the AI community itself is divided on it, whether it's divided equally or I think the majority of people in the AI community think that artificial superintelligence is possible and is likely to show up in the next 50 years. But as I mentioned, from my perspective and from the perspective of a lot of philosophers I know, that's built on kind of an ontological framework that sees the world as having a particular structure, a more deterministic structure, let's say, than many of us would buy into. And so jump into the debate, it's a fascinating and fun debate, but do understand that everybody you're talking with is an opinion. Some may be more informed from a technological perspective, and some may be more informed from a philosophical perspective. Some of you may say, why do I care about people informed from a philosophical perspective? Well, there have been naturalistic philosophers criticizing scientific conclusions throughout history, but particularly in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And by and large, their record is better than the scientists who have been predicting very optimistic goals and outcomes.
Yeah, it's definitely a very complex way forward, which leads me to my next question. Then we'll hop into some audience questions, and we won't be taking any questions live. So if you do have any, please add them to the Slido. Um, but my question for you is, given that we're in an active arms race and AI dominance war with China, how do you balance, or how would you suggest listeners balance the desire to win that AI dominant position, knowing how much that will influence the rest of the global order, versus maximizing the ethics and safety steps necessary? Are they mutually exclusive? Can they be done together? And if so, what would you suggest?
Well, I think they're feeding each other. They aren't mutually exclusive. I also think most people who talk about science, China don't know what they're talking about. They have some simplistic notions about Xi Jinping being a dictator and not always a benevolent dictator. But and perhaps he could on his own just make a decision to invade Taiwan, and he may very well want to. But that's not representative of the fact that we're dealing with a society 4 times larger than ours. We're dealing with all kinds of expertise necessary for it to function, and in some respects, it functions better than our societies do. They also are not stupid by any means. In fact, they are leading in many areas of AI and other research. And that lack of stupidity means they understand what the risks are too. And they now have their own AI ethics. And they actually think that they are leading the world in innovative ways of implementing AI ethics. So I'm not going to argue whether any of that's true or not, but, whether they're leading the world or whether the EU is a little bit ahead of them, certainly ahead of a lot of what's going on in the United States. So I don't believe the arms race has to happen in the way we're predicting it. And just as the nuclear arms race so far has not happened and has led to the collapse of the Soviet Union rather than the Third World War, I think there's plenty of opportunity for that with China. So it's kind of, negotiate, but, yes, carry a big stick, as Teddy Roosevelt would have said. You can't be naive here, but this is like the question of, is AI going to be harmful or beneficial in sum total? It's not decided yet. And I think the Chinese are trying to signal that they would like to be involved in richer processes of negotiations. But whether that will happen under the present administration or whether by the time the present US administration is finished, the world will be so clearly divided between countries in spheres of influence. I mean, I don't think people can begin to grasp what the Killing the Foreign Relations and USAID bills did in the last couple of months, one yesterday, in terms of alienating us from Africa and opening the door for China to be the dominant player now. So what all of that's going to look like by the time we have a government in the US ready to negotiate some of these things, I don't know. But I'm just saying there's a certain narrative out there that says when you have two great powers, kind of the Thucydides deadlock, they will inevitably have to go to war with each other. I don't buy it. I think just the fact that we know about that inevitability gives us room for negotiation or the prediction of that inevitability.
Okay, great. So moving on to some audience questions. Um, what is your opinion about the AI 2027 scenario, given the strong AI related forecasting track record of its authors?
Well, again, forecasting is forecasting, and yesterday's record doesn't always mean today's will be true. So the singularity should happen within this decade, according to Ray Kurzweil's, who's had actually an amazing forecasting record based on his exponential growth. So I don't know what their recommendations or their prognostications are in total because I haven't gotten around to read it. But from what I've heard so far, I think it's a particular kind of narrative. It may be a reflection of the prevailing narrative today because of where we are and what's entrenched. But I think our challenge is how we are going to alter some of the prevailing narratives so that we don't lead to some of the more dire conclusions.
Next question. Given the pacing problem and Colin Ridge dilemma, how can mission-led startup societies outpace both technological acceleration and entrenched institutions?
Well, here's the problem. The problem is, in some senses, they have, and you see the results of that in the EU AI Act. But even the EU AI Act has not come to enforcement yet, and that's what we will see over the next year or two, whether there's real enforcement in place for some of these elements. But when I first got involved in the whole world of bioethics at the Yale Interdisciplinary Center for Bioethics, I met an older scholar there named Arthur Galston. And Arthur Galston was he was a biologist. And he had invented the defoliant that became Agent Orange. I don't know if you all know what Agent Orange was, but the US dropped Agent Orange in unbelievable quantities on Vietnam during the Vietnam War. A defoliant so they could, less the aircraft could see the enemy. Basically, that's what they wanted. And untold numbers of soldiers came down with serious diseases after, and not to mention everyone in Vietnam who came down with these serious. In any case, Art was so taken aback by that his invention could have been used in this way that he went around to scientists for the rest of his life and he says, you have to be responsible to your technologies. Up to that time, the prevailing line was that the prevailing view had been that I'm just a scientist. My job is to discover and invent. It is the policymakers' job to regulate. Now we're in a universe where the scientists argue to the policymakers, my science is so complicated, AI is so complicated that you won't know how to regulate it. And regulations. I had to turn off my phone. And the regulations that you put in place will have unexpected consequences. So just leave it to us. We'll self-regulate. And in any case, you don't want us to you don't want China to leapfrog us in the arms race. And by the way, here's $100,000 for your reelection campaign. You don't need to bribe that many congressmen to stalemate a Congress like the one we have right now. So that's kind of where we've been, kind of an anti-regulatory framework, using the fear of the Chinese being much more effective than us, or at least bypassing us and winning the arms race. So that was the line that Art Galston would encounter everywhere. By the time we got to the deep learning revolution, the AI researchers were actually jumping in to the fray.